If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
A warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you, as we're going to be joined in the next few minutes by Curtis Rogers. He does such amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports, taking a look at this great game of college basketball. He's out there in Washington, so we're able to touch upon a little bit of West Coast teams. We're able to talk a little bit about the Big Ten as well, but additionally, we're going to be looking at these NBA draft decisions. Something that I've been touching upon the last few days on this podcast is the fact that you might have a little bit of a, for lack of a better term, second wave in terms of transfer portal, because right now a lot of the big prospects are gone. You've got a lot of these teams that will be able to fill up much of their rotations. You still have a few teams out there that are hoping and praying so these guys return back to school. They've got some NIL funds to be able to lend them, so we're going to be talking about that with Curtis and so much more. And then in the final segment, going to get you guys a roundup of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, please do fire those in one of two ways. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GUnit_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Did not get in any Twitter/X questions, so be sure to jump on those for me, just like we're jumping on Edge Boost to be able to utilize all of our funds. Edge Boost is an account set up to make sure that all of your gambling transactions, they get approved 100% of the time. You're able to earn cashback rewards as you utilize Edge Boost. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, Greg. That gets you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit of up to $25. That's edgeboost.bet, promo code Greg. Now let's talk with our good friend Curtis Rogers. Does such great work over at 710 Seattle Sports. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Also is the Seattle Mariners pre and post game show host as well this time of year, so he's a man that wears many hats and does so also well. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X, along with Instagram at A Kid From Ken. And Curtis, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Greg, always happy to be on with you, and there is no offseason in college basketball anymore with the portal, with the NBA draft process. We are still trying to figure out what these rosters are going to look like heading into the 25-26 season, and still plenty of interesting decisions still left to be made for some big-time impact players.
Oh, absolutely. And you're referring to the NBA draft. We've got a lot of guys that are currently testing the waters. We just saw the combine a few days ago, and I don't know how you gauge things, but I think that there could be, for lack of a better term, a second wave in terms of the transfer portal, because we've got a lot of guys that are out there, they're gauging their decisions. Many of these guys I anticipate are going to be going back to school, and many of these guys are out there in the transfer portal, and I think that there's a lot of teams that are hoping for that to be the case, because there's a lot of these teams that have like 1 or 2 remaining roster spots.
Yeah, and I mean, I look at a team like St. John's kind of waiting out what R.J. Luis is going to do. He has the do not contact label, so it's going to be interesting to see what a player of his caliber does. Reigning Big East Player of the Year. I kind of wonder what Rick Pitino is kind of thinking about, because we know Pitino earlier in the year had mentioned on a podcast, I forget which one, where he basically was like, look, I'm not recruiting high school guys anymore, at least not for this upcoming season. If we want to continue this, I can't wait around to develop high school players. I got to get veterans in here. I got to get guys that have been battle tested in college basketball. So you have a very prominent head coach coming out and saying, like, look, I am going to hit the portal hard, and I'm going to hit the portal harder than anybody. It really makes a lot of these draft day decisions very important, not just for what the NBA is going to look like and what that draft board is going to look like, especially when you get to probably the end of the lottery, the end of the first round, maybe even the second round. What kind of grades will these guys get to say, hey, I'm okay with an early second round grade. I'm okay rolling the dice and getting a mid to late second round grade, because what is going to be more impactful right now, the money you can get on a guaranteed NBA rookie contract or maybe the guaranteed money you can get in NIL?
Yep, absolutely. I think that that is going to be so interesting to gauge. And how much do you think that things are going to be impacted by the fact that it does appear the money is drying up a little bit more this time of year rather than last year? Because last year, you remember, great, Osibor got that big deal. He was a little bit of a late signee. Same goes for Coleman Hawkins. Meanwhile, PJ Haggerty, he got a little bit less by waiting. And I think that that's such an interesting dynamic with this offseason.
It is, and it's definitely going to play into a lot of these draft day decisions because, like you said, most of these teams have spent their allotment of NIL money. We are not to the point yet where the NCAA is handing out everybody the same kind of check every single offseason. It is up to these donors, it's up to these collectives to really round out these rosters. And like you said, a lot of these teams can't afford to wait around. I know some teams are looking at this as kind of like, maybe for Arizona example, maybe Carter Bryant will come back. Doesn't sound like he's coming back. It sounds like he is 10 toes into the draft pool. I know he hasn't officially declared yet, but I believe in talking to ESPN's Jeff Borzella this week, he said, I'm all in. So feels like Arizona has kind of moved on. They addressed, I think, his position in getting Koa Pete, the 5-star forward from the state of Arizona. Also got Braden Burries as well. So Tommy Lloyd may be going a little bit younger. I know they've also added a couple of international players as well in the last few weeks. So could be very interesting to see how that roster looks. But yeah, I mean, the longer you wait, if you're a draft prospect, I think the less options you're going to have, and you may end up just kind of being forced to stay in the NBA draft if you want to cash in again.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And it's a very interesting sort of dynamic because we saw last season it was the exact opposite there as well. As joining me on the show, we do have Curtis Rogers, who does such an amazing job over at 710 Seattle Sports, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that what has been interesting as well is the way that these teams are structuring things as well, because I think that there are a lot of teams that, even though they probably want these guys with NBA draft decisions, a lot of teams have seen what has happened when they have stuck all their eggs in the basket of one or two guys. You're out there watching it, you know all too well about that with great Osibor in Washington. They took a completely different approach this offseason, and I think that there's a lot more teams that are determining that depth is the biggest thing of all else. Now, we've seen a few guys like Robert Wright getting paid by BYU because BYU just has $1 trillion, it feels like. But that said, I think that it's been really interesting to see how these teams have really been able to just stack the talent here in the offseason.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at just kind of the depth of the last few national championship teams, obviously with UConn and Florida. I mean, it has been a big reason why those teams have been able to cut down the nets come March. I mean, yes, you want your rotation to have a really solid 6 or 7 guys, but if you can maybe stretch it to 8, especially 9, maybe later in the regular season, then you're going to get fresh legs in the NCAA tournament. And as we know, that is going to be of the utmost importance the further along you get in that tournament. I mean, you're playing elimination game after elimination game after elimination game. You can't really coast in the way that you might in, say, a non-conference game or a game in December or January. Not to say that these kids coast, the effort is always there, but the urgency may not be there in terms of your season being on the line. So, yes, you got to have depth. That is a very big thing. I don't know if you want to maybe bring in a guy that might upset the rotations that you have. What's more important to a team that has a good starting 5? Adding another talented player, a guy who can disrupt maybe that starting 5 and the chemistry they have, or maybe adding a glue guy to your bench, somebody that can kind of fortify things and really help you have a much more well-rounded effort night in and night out.
Yep, no question about it. I do think that just being able to have that overall balance is so big with these teams, and I think that many teams found out the hard way. Hey, we got a big man and everything like that, but it wasn't turning out to be an end-all be-all, and I think that that's an interesting debate as well, because I always do believe that big men have a little bit more value in college rather than the NBA, but we saw it last season with the guys like Coleman Hawkins, great Osibor, where they went, and it really didn't lead to a lot of success. Hunter Dickinson over at Kansas, that didn't lead to a lot of wins, and do you feel like there's perhaps a little bit more of a devaluing with regards to big man in college basketball, whereas much like in the NBA, guards, it feels like it's becoming just a little bit more important in college?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at what Florida was able to do, Walter Clayton being the super duper star that he was for the Gators this season. Guard play, you have to have that in March. You cannot survive without it. I kind of wonder, too, what a transfer of like Henry Visar, somebody who played very well for Arizona this season, he goes to North Carolina, and I get that North Carolina is always going to be among the most talented teams in the country, but like you said, I think the learning curve for big men, at least to assimilate to a style of play, maybe is a little bit longer than it is for guards, especially because big men play such a specialized game anyway. Now, Visar is a guy that can, roam out to the 3-point line. You can knock down a shot, from 18 feet and beyond. But again, it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be the biggest difference made from day one. Maybe it's an investment that pays off deeper. The deeper that the Tar Heels get this season, I just don't see it right now in terms of, how much of an impact this is going to be. Umar Ballo, another guy, he transfers to Indiana this last season. Mike Woodson says, I don't need to be here after this. And Ballo also had some off the court issues in terms of, maybe being out a little bit too late, experiencing the Bloomington nightlife. But it was just a mixed bag of results for the Hoosiers this season. So, yeah, I think big men, you do run the risk of having some flameouts, but also you do have a possibility of, say, like Gonzaga with Graham Ike, getting a guy who really fits in well and a guy who has given them some really good minutes over the last couple of years. Really like what he's been able to do for the Zags. And there's that benefit, too, of bringing in a guy who's willing to put in the work to do that. But I think the big men, I think there is going to be a little bit of a longer learning curve for them, as opposed to a guard who can kind of plug and play.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned Umar Ballo over at Indiana. As joining me on the show, we do have Curtis Rogers, who does such great work over at 710 Seattle Sports, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. Because if I look just nationally at everything that we've seen here in the offseason, I really think that the big winners are the Big Ten. We have seen many of these teams start to fully embrace and just get it right in the transfer portal. And then the 3 coaching hires that we saw at Indiana, Iowa, and Minnesota, I really think that this conference in general has been able to do a nice job. Heck, Buzz Williams going on over to Maryland, I thought that was a good hire as well. And I really like all the moves that have been made with regards to portal and in terms of these coaches that are entering into the conference.
Yeah, and I think of all the power conferences, the Big Ten is the one that needed to look itself in the mirror a little bit longer than everybody else, especially considering their title drought going on, 26 years heading into next year's NCAA tournament. It's been since Michigan State in 2000. Purdue coming into this season with very lofty expectations. A lot of people have them as their preseason number one. Obviously, we still have, a lot of these draft decisions still to be made. Houston waiting for Milos Uzan to come back. That could potentially put Houston in the catbird seat for preseason number one. But I think the Big Ten is definitely under the most pressure to figure it out and to bring home a national championship, especially because of, how conference realignment has worked out. They were instrumental in gutting the Pac-12 and making a lot of these moves to realign themselves and make them much more competitive, not just in college football, which is obvious, which is the biggest reason for conference realignment, but also in college basketball too. You bring in a blue blood name like UCLA, that's obviously going to, improve your chances as a conference to potentially bring home a national championship. I mean, UCLA hasn't done it in 30 years, but still they've made a few Final Fours in that time. And as we know, the randomness of the NCAA tournament, making the Final Four, that is no small feat. That is a big, big thing. So I look at the Big Ten right now, and you mentioned all those coaching hires that they've had. I really think that conference has learning to kind of play up to speed here in 2025, 2026, because you kind of have to play a style that maybe might assimilate a little bit better to what we see in the ACC, what we see in the SEC, what we see in the Big 12. I mean, you look at the last year's national championship game, it was the 2 best conferences in college basketball. It was the SEC versus the Big 12. The Big Ten, nowhere to be seen.
Yep, with the Big Ten, it was certainly a rough season for them last year, with Purdue making a little bit of a run, but getting knocked off in the game against Houston inside of pretty much your own home state. So that was a little bit brutal. And for the Big Ten, I do like the moves that they have made, and do want to make this note for you as well. Just in terms of what we've seen this offseason, certainly the Big Ten has had a great offseason, but are there a few teams in general that you take a look at that you feel like are flying a bit under the radar that you really like what they've done this offseason as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good teams right now and kind of waiting on what these teams can do in terms of guys coming back. I mean, Florida obviously having won the national championship and potentially reloading. I mean, if Alex Condon can come back, if they can get Boogie Fland out of the transfer portal, which kind of seems like a real possibility, I mean, you're looking at a team that is going to be right back amongst the NCAA's best teams this season. I really like what Duke has been able to do. If they're able to get Cedric Coward, which I don't know if that is going to be much of a possibility, as it sounds like he is really shooting up draft boards right now, looking at possibly a first-round pick, a guy coming out of Eastern Washington just 2 years ago, then transfers to Washington State, only plays a handful of games, but NBA scouts seem to be loving him. I really like what he could potentially bring to that Duke ball club. And then how about Auburn? I know they're trying to coax Tahan Pettiford to come back to school. I really like his game, and I think just maybe a more expanded role this season for him could really do wonders for the Auburn Tigers this season. So hopefully college basketball fans see Pettiford come back. I know he has been somebody that has opened a lot of eyes at the scouting combine just based off of his athleticism. He is a bit undersized, but I think if he comes back to college basketball for another season, I get that he's, just a shade above 6 feet tall, which in the NBA is not ideal size, but I think he is somebody that could really, really have a big impact in this 2025-2026 college basketball season.
Yep, I think that he can have a big impact, but not quite the impact that you have on the sports landscape out there in the Pacific Northwest, Curtis. You do such an amazing job over at 710 Seattle Sports. I know that your main beat right now is the pre- and post-game hosting for the Seattle Mariners, but you're a 5-tool player. You do a little bit of everything, so love the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, we're keeping track of the portal. SeattleSports.com is where you want to go if you are just looking at basketball here in the Northwest. Washington, they've made a lot of portal moves. They've gotten a lot of commitments. I think expectations are going to be raised for the Huskies this season, so it's going to be fun following them. Obviously, the Zags are the Zags, and we'll see what the Cougs can do in year 2 under David Riley. But Northwest basketball, hopefully it's a much more well-rounded effort out here. It's not just the Zags this year. Hopefully the Huskies can be there amongst teams in that more competitive Big Ten that we just talked about. But Greg, always happy to hop on with you, and I can't wait to do it again.
Absolutely. It is a long off season. We're about 170 days away from the start of the season, but you know what? The teams that we are going to be seeing in March, they're being built right now. Curtis is doing a great job of taking a look at it all. So a big thanks to Curtis for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VC Family Podcast. And coming up next is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Sunday.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Everybody, good love you, Las Vegas. For Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Always great to be able to get Curtis Rogers aboard. He does such amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. Taking a look at this great game that we all know of college basketball. And if it's happening out there in the Pacific Northwest, he's doing a great job of covering it all. So big thanks to Curtis for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the past 24 hours. 2 of the better D2 transfers that were left on the board. They committed, as you had Will Wilson, who was over at Western Washington this past season, be able to supply the team with about 15.5 points, 4 boards, 3.5 assists, while shooting 38% from 3. He has decided that he is going to be going to Houston Christian. And then Central Oklahoma's Israel Hart. He's went to Southern Miss. He was averaging about 17 points, 4 assists. He knocked down about 38 or so percent of his threes. And I really like these teams that are jumping on these D2 guys, because we have seen in the past few seasons these guys go from the Division 2 level to the Division 1 level and have success. Not so much the big man. It's a little bit more of a case where I believe that the shooting itself is going to translate itself a little bit more, just because the overall size, when you have to deal with the athleticism and everything like that, that does cause things to be a little bit out of sorts. But for Southern Miss, they needed it because they bring in Cam Polisi, who was over at Canisius, and Eric Bateman Jr., who was a bench warmer over at Mississippi State. They're really looking to build themselves up after the last few seasons. It has been very much less than tremendous, to say the least. So I do like that pickup for them. And then additionally, if you're taking a look at what we all got in terms of the transfer portal and what we saw on Sunday, you did have Munir Panoam decide that he's going to go to Xavier. Now, I don't think that this guy's going to be too much of an impact guy for Panome as a sophomore last season. 13 points. He was able to pull in there nearly 6 rebounds per game, so he's got a little bit of versatility. That said, if Xavier plans to utilize him for a lot of minutes, it's probably not been a great season, and or you've got a lot of injuries, as I feel like Xavier under Mr. Patino, I think that they're going to be able to have themselves a very nice season with all the pieces that they brought in, because this is just a completely reloaded and revamped lineup, as they're going to be really building around, in my opinion, where you're going to be able to get out of Malik Moore from Montana. He was a relatively good shooting guard. I do like the fact that they brought in All Right as well, which that's one of the best names that you're going to find in all of college basketball. Trey Carroll coming in from Florida Atlantic. Again, I think that this is just a little bit more of a depth piece in general. You've got a few guys from the Xavier roster from season ago that decided to stick around with Patino being able to take over as well. And for Munir Panome, if you take a look at his outside shooting, because this guy right around about 6'2" or so, only shot about 22% from 3-point range. So that is a little bit of a knock that I have on him. If they're utilizing him as a depth piece, great. If they're utilizing him as a big-time starter, well, that's going to be a little bit of an issue. And Rodney Johnson Jr., he had been committed to Toledo before. He was averaging 13 points per contest over at Tennessee Tech. He has decommitted from them, and now we shall see who he's going to be going to, as that's a big blow for a Toledo team that hasn't added a ton here via the transfer portal, so that's a bit of an issue. And you saw Britt Harris, who had committed to Pacific last season. He was over at USC Upstate. He was averaging 11.5 points, 2.5 assists, knocked down 37.5% of his threes. He decommitted, which Pacific has just added like 10 guys here in the transfer portal. I actually feel like they've had a really good class, so I think that Harris was probably thinking that he wasn't going to be getting a lot of playing time, and or there's that thing called a larger paycheck out there as well. I don't know which one it is, but certainly something caused him to change his mind, so we will find out about that, and we'll see where those two guys end up. Darius Ward, he was over at Coppin State this last season, played just in 11 games due to injury, and he was their best player. 13 points, 5 boards, not a great 3-point shooter, but still was able to give you a bit of something at 6'6". He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Grambling, and this is a really good fit for Grambling, because I feel like with his 6'6" size, he's going to be able to do a nice job of just fitting that system where defense, it does reign supreme for Grambling. They've done a nice job here in the offseason. Roderick Coffey, he follows his coach on over from Florida A&M. Nazar Muhammad, he was over at UTSA, meet me for the Roadrunners. They're getting him in as well, so Grambling, I do think that they're going to be able to build things up, and I do think that with Grambling, they made a really good offseason coaching hire as they brought in Patrick Crary, who 2 seasons ago was actually a really good NAIA coach out there in the state of Texas over at St. Mary's. He did a nice job rebuilding Florida A&M last season, so this is a good get for them, and overall, this has been a very nice offseason for them. This has been an interesting offseason. Nichols hasn't added a ton of guys, but they bring in Christian Wilborn. He last season was limited to just 15 games due to injury. He threw in there about a steal, 4 points per contest. This is someone that was able to do quite a bit when he was over at St. Joe's a few seasons ago as well, and I think that this is going to be panning out very well. If you look at what he did when he was over at St. Joe's as a freshman, he was averaging 6 points per contest, not necessarily a great 3-point shooter, but guy that's able to give you about a steal per contest. I do think that overall, this is going to be a guy that's going to be able to pan out, not necessarily super versatile at 6'2", and would like to see the 3-point shooting be a little bit better, but he's a very good on-ball defender, and he's going to be able to fit that Nichols system in which they do look to generate quite a few turnovers. You've got Marcus Green, who was over at Hawaii this last season. He has decided that he's going to be going to Fordham, and this is the second guy with Akira Jacob heading on over from Hawaii to Fordham. Last season for Green, he was averaging about 7.5 points per contest, and he shot 42.5% from 3-point range 2 seasons ago when he was over at Houston Christian. I think that Fordham is doing a really good job here in the transfer portal. Mike Magpayo is someone that I think is one of the more underrated coaches in all of college basketball. I love what he was able to do at UC Riverside last season, and he brought in a few guys from UC Riverside. Didn't necessarily get the blue chipper guys, which I was a little bit surprised about, but that said, he's done a nice job bringing in Christian Henry, a double-figure scorer from Eastern Michigan. Jace Howard, who was glued to the bench over at Michigan last few seasons, he comes in. DeJour Reeves, top scorer over at Iona and Northern Colorado, is going to be coming in as well. I love what this team has been able to do in terms of the pieces that they brought in, and I think that that's going to be big time for them. Jaden Lipscomb, he was over at Florida National this last season, averaging about 6.5 points per contest. Not a guy that really shot it well from 3-point range, but that said, he is going to be able to go on over to Cleveland State, and I should say for Lipscomb, those were his numbers 2 seasons ago. Last year, he was limited to just 2 games due to injury, and this is a guy that came up from the non-Division I level. He played at Lakeland College, so he's going to be heading on over to the Midwest for Cleveland State. We did see them make that coaching regime change in the offseason after they lost their coach, so it's been a little bit tumultuous all season for them, and that's a big reason why they've been a little bit slow going here in the transfer portal. Would like to see Cleveland State make a few more moves, but I thought that Josiah Harris coming in over for Macron was a really good move, and you've got a guy in Kamari Johnson Johnson, who comes on over from Western Carolina at 6'4", good size out of him. Foster Wonder was a solid three-point shooter over at UW Green Bay the last few seasons as well. So all in all, I like the pieces that they brought in. Would like to see just a little bit more in terms of the depth of them as well. And then you've got this man who decided that he was going to commit. Kydrick Davis, he last season was over at West Georgia, and he was solid for them. 10 points per contest, a block, a steal per game at 6'5", good versatility. He's decided that he's going to be going to NC Central, and this just very much fits the LaVelle Moton sort of role for him. As for LaVelle Moton, he loves these versatile guys that are able to do a little bit of everything, and I think that he's going to be very rock solid in this system. Now, for NC Central, they've been a little bit slow going out there in the transfer portal, and for NC Central, they did lose quite a few pieces from the offseason as well, so we're going to see how they're going to be able to materialize. You'll notice with the Spike and MEAC teams, they're really starting to get onto the board a little bit more now than they were at the beginning part of the offseason, because they just don't have the same pockets as a lot of these teams, but they do have one thing that a lot of these teams they can't necessarily guarantee you, and that would be playing time. So now they're starting to be able to get up on the board a little bit more. As for NC Central, I believe that was really either move number 1 or number 2 that they made here in the offseason. So we'll see if there's a little bit more for them coming forward, and we'll see what this man is able to do. As you've got Divine Ogachukwu, who was over at Miami this last season, was able to put up about 5.5 points per contest. Not a guy that really lit it up from 3, but was able to generate about a steal per contest. He has decided that he is going to be adding on over to Michigan State. Relatively solid ad for Michigan State. They're buying low on a kid that was at a Miami team that was just a big giant mess this last season for Mr. Ogachukwu. Not a guy that was like a top 1 recruit when he was coming out of high school, but still, he was able to be a relatively solid recruit. I think that he was just more of a 3-star guy out there, so I do think that he's going to be able to come in for Michigan State. If he's just a little bit more of a prospect in general, it's going to go well for them, because with Michigan State, they do have quite a bit of talent returning from a season ago. Fully recognize that they do lose a few pieces from that backcourt, and for Ogachukwu, I think that he's going to do a nice job learning underneath some of those guys that they return from season ago. And for Michigan State, also bringing in Trey Fort along Caleb Glenn. So overall, I do like the pieces that they've added. Feel like Michigan State could probably add one more guy in the transfer portal, feel secure, but feel secure the fact that this podcast, it comes at you every day, regular season and off season. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one of 2 ways to be able to further this in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, LRCM, maybe does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks to Curtis Rogers, does such amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. He joined me in the last segment, and I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.